Eric, Eric Ricaute from Greenview. It's an absolute pleasure to be able to talk to you, Eric, and I'm hoping that you're going to be optimistic about the ways in which we can address the problems of carbon. How long have you been around doing this?
Well, it was first off a pleasure, Harold, to be speaking now after all these years. It was June of 1997 when I first started in my career of sustainability and hospitality and tourism, working in an eco lodge in the Northeast Caribbean of Costa Rica. And so now it's 25 years, my 25th year of this.
And are you optimistic about the future?
I'm optimistic, but you have to be. You have to be optimistic. And that's the other part of this is the wave of change. I mean, the way that we're seeing the momentum build to rush to solve things is really, really impressive right now. So that's why I'm optimistic, because I think that we have a shot, that finally there's the awareness and there's the movement and there's the pieces that are being put together structurally for how we approach this.
And are you seeing that particularly in the accommodation construction sector? Because that's been one of the challenges, isn't it? How do we get hotels which in 30 years' time will be where they need to be in terms of being decarbonized?
Yeah, that's a good point. The issue or the topic of net zero is really kind of, I like it to a movement. There's a net zero sort of movement globally. And one of the basic fundamental tenets of net zero is that you need to decarbonize your entire scope of activities, not just what you're burning in the building, but the entire value chain. And so you need to look everywhere and look to decarbonize everywhere. And so we can't sweep under the rug the sources of emissions in the travel industry or in the hotel industry that before were not just the operation of the building. So these issues of what was the carbon footprint of the steel, the concrete, building the building, the land use change, all of that, and then the downstream. What about the emissions of the waste being generated? So that's the piece of net zero is it makes a universal touch point and lens with which you're looking at your entire scope of activities. So that piece of decarbonizing the building, it's not just the hotel, but real estate in general, this is part of net zero, is suddenly we have to realize building a commercial building has a footprint through its life cycle upstream, and we need to address that in some way. Otherwise, we can't make a credible net zero claim because everybody's going to ask these questions.
I've heard rumors that you're about to launch something really quite exciting, Eric, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to interview you. Do you want to just tell us what we can expect to see in the near future?
Sure, yeah, happy to. So as you know, this net zero topic has been keeping me up at night. So I'm optimistic, but I'm also losing some sleep because of it, because it came with such a rush in the last year. There are these market forces that have pressured hotels to look into net zero. Number one is a fact that hotels in terms of real estate are owned by major investments, asset management firms that are asking, BlackRock being one. You look at Vanguard, they own a lot of holds in a lot of real estate companies, and they're saying, we want you to plan for net zero. So that's one. The second is you see a lot of companies going net zero. And again, net zero intrinsically encompassing the value chain. As it's currently defined, the value chain of business or of companies, there are 15 kind of macro categories, of which one of them is business travel. And so because of that, the pressures on the consumer, the customer side, are going to be more great on the net zero. So we've got the investor push and we've got the customer push on hotels. So that's what led me to embark on this with the work that we're doing now. So is that sort of the background context, or any other questions on that?
Eric, I'm quite interested to hear, because I think what you just said, if I could just make sure I've understood this properly, is that a lot of the pressure is coming from the business travel sector. Is there much coming from leisure?
Definitely. So leisure is coming. It's just right now the net zero wording, the net zero context is really in government policy, it's in climate talks, and it's in big business, and it's in the investor ESG world. So it's there, but I don't see much of the leisure traveler talking net zero. Now, leisure traveler is talking carbon neutral, talking climate positive, talking sustainable tourism, talking regenerative travel. There's all of that that's going on. And it's a different lexicon right now, but it's all going to converge because we've got sort of this common denominator with which we're looking at the impacts of hotels.
So just before you tell us about this wonderful new tool you've been developing, because I'm really looking forward to hearing about that, where do you see carbon offsetting in the net zero debate?
Yeah. Well, that's an important one because carbon offsetting has to be part of the equation. And that's the piece of net zero, is that you basically, on one hand, you can't just carbon offset your way out of this. We know that. On the other, you can't deny that carbon offsetting will play a role. The question then of where and to how much and how does carbon offsetting play a role, and specifically for our industry, that's one of the key points of net zero that needs to be addressed as well, which is also one that we're trying to help solve, or at least orient the industry in this current work.
Yeah, I mean, the problem, the thing that really worries me, Eric, and maybe your tool will help us to address this, is the real danger that people just settle on carbon offsetting as it's still a very cheap way of pretending that you've decarbonized, isn't it? And that's part of the problem. You can buy a carbon offset for next to nothing. I think it was the Jet2 director who said it's going to cost us the price of a cup of coffee to offset the carbon emissions from our flights, and I don't think he meant that he wasn't going to do anything else, but that really sticks in the mind as one of the problems of carbon offsetting. It's just way too cheap.
Yeah, well, it's cheap, but it's also it's honestly a misdirection of the best way to decarbonize for the industry. Not only for the industry, but for the role that hotels can play in the wider discussion. Because if we look at the pathways and how do you get to decarbonizing the world by 2050, it depends on every sector, depends on what you're doing, depends on if you're a government, if you're in the business of generating energy, all that. But for hotels, and this is what we're trying to do here, say, okay, all that out there for net zero, but for a hotel, how does this play out? And the most important thing where the hotel and commercial buildings fit in is electric power. If we look at decarbonization, the one most important transversal piece of this is that the power grid needs to decarbonize. And so how does the power grid decarbonize? One, regulation, government policy, all that, but two, the market mechanisms where an entity says, I choose to buy renewable electricity, either directly installing things or hooking up to my building, or through a market mechanism that enables adding renewables to the grid. So that right there is the first thing that hotels should look at beyond the traditional carbon reduction via energy efficiency. So this is where the conversation is one of the two things that started this conversation. First, we're seeing this plethora of carbon offsetting across the value chain. Everybody's trying to get into the game. The intermediaries, travel buyers, other initiatives, companies themselves. So that's going on. And then we look at this and we say, well, carbon offsetting is a solution, but the first thing you should do is reduce your energy, right? We know that. That's the efficiency, reduce it. Second is you need to then transition to renewable energy, and most importantly, renewable electricity. So the question you should ask is not, is this a carbon neutral stay? It's, is this stay powered by 100% renewable electricity? That's the question to ask now. Then the second question, if you want, will be, and is the rest of it, after the efficiency marks that are in place, offset and is offset in a current way? But when you jump and say, is this a carbon neutral stay, or hey, carbon neutral travel, you then remove the opportunity for the hotel industry to actually play a role in globally adding renewable energy to the grid through the market mechanism, and for the traveler and the guest and the customer and everybody to do that. So that's where that fit on the initial piece.
So Eric, let's turn, if we may, to what you've been working on, because it does seem to me that more transparency about how particular accommodations have achieved what they're calling net zero or carbon neutral, a bit more transparency about that is going to be really important to making sure that we do actually decarbonize rather than pretend that we have.
Agreed. And I think that's where it comes to in the second piece, which is, if a company says, I want to go net zero, I want to make a claim, I'm a hotel, how do I do it? There wasn't a methodology out there. There wasn't guidance. There's general high-level pieces. There's something out there now, and we have worked with SBTI that they have their net zero thing coming out. But again, that's still something that's applicable generically across any business. But if I'm a hotel or hotel company, and I want to make a credible claim to stakeholders to say, I'm going net zero, here is my plan, then what does that look like? So that's why we embarked and said, we will help together with the coalition of entities that always have supported and can really push this out, the methodology for how a hotel and hotel company can credibly chart a pathway, measure, and approach net zero over time from 2021 to 2050 and all the sort of years in between, because that way there's accountability in 2025, in 2030. And then most importantly, people know, here are the things I should work toward. Here's how. Here are the 12, 13 areas of carbon I need to address. Here's the priority for addressing them. And here's how I should go about that. So that's really where that came from, is then you can make a credible claim and then people can see, how are you progressing against that?
In other words, are you on the track that you have planned to be, so that by 2050 you are genuinely net zero?
Yeah, that's it. And the other that we are putting forth is that there's the building piece, right? So the embodied carbon of the building, that's going to take some time to figure out. How do you even calculate that for a hotel? How do you allocate that or amortize it over the lifetime of a building? Because if I build a hotel, then I sell it to somebody else, am I supposed to offset the whole thing, or are they going to take credit for that kind of thing? How does the operator of the hotel versus the owner versus the franchisor? So all those pieces. But the point we're making here is, okay, let's not spend too much time on calculating right now the embodied carbon of your building. One, go figure out energy efficiency and renewable energy purchases. And two, start engaging upstream to figure this out, because this is where there's possibilities. A building is not just a building. It's not like there's some random developer and construction company that we all need to engage. No, building is steel and concrete. So what is steel doing? What is concrete doing? And how do we play into that value chain? How do we engage? How do we ask the right questions? What are they doing? What are the good practices? We need to go figure that out. So let's do that in parallel, that we're really putting the money and time and effort in the most important things of energy efficiency and purchase renewables.
That sounds, Eric, as very much as a shift from, if you like, feeling guilty to being around an agenda about what you can't do, to a much more aggressively can do agenda. And perhaps that's where your optimism is coming from now, because you and I have had years of trying to persuade people not to do things. I hear in your voice a shift to and almost, if I might say so, an evangelical shift towards saying, well, look, these are the things we can do, and these are the things we must do. These are the ways we must take responsibility to make our accommodation industry a lot more sustainable and to achieve the net zero. Have I got that right? Definitely.
Guilty as charged for the optimism, maybe even a little evangelicalism right now as well. I mean, so yeah, this is my 25th year in sustainability for hospitality tourism. And the thing I had to introspectively look at over the years was, why do I even get into this to begin with? Back in the time, this is the environmental movement of the 70s, environmental protection, that was really around identifying, look, there's something wrong with what we're doing, and we shouldn't be doing it. We shouldn't be going into those protected areas, shouldn't be clubbing seals, we shouldn't be doing things. And so this sort of environmental mentality was about what you can't do. Don't do this, don't do that. And then for us in the sustainability world, it was really well, I want to take a different path, but I'm kind of holier than thou, right? I'm not mainstream. I'm doing things right. And there was kind of a purism to it. It was, you have to be all in or nothing. But I realized it's like, that's so saying intrinsically, I'm in the sustainability community and I am therefore different or somewhat better than everyone else who's not, that doesn't help anything, because we need to get everybody on this journey. And so that sort of turned it around. And then second, the interesting thing was, as the discipline of sustainability has come, when you think back what we're doing now versus what we were doing 20 years ago, the game has changed. And so really it's not about what you can't do anymore. It's what can you do? And that's what we're trying to say here is, okay, there are certain things we can't do right now in the hotel, right? There's certain issues that need to be solved, and other players are going to help. But what can we do right now? And then let's keep focusing or keep investigating what can be done, because we know through engagement, scale, and technology, there's going to be a lot more.
How important do you think transparency in all of this is, Eric? Because, my concern is, if you and I have debated certification many times, but let's not do that again today. We've done it. But one of the things that concerns me is the opportunity that the consumer, whether that's a business consumer or a leisure consumer, has to actually know what's really going on. And I think what Google have just done on aviation is something of a game changer. People will argue that the figures aren't exactly right. I'm sure that there'll be a lot of that. But on the other hand, it does mean that I can go and look at how I'm going to fly to Costa Rica and choose to fly on the most carbon efficient way. Are we going to get to that with hotels?
We are in transparency. It's important for the consumer, but actually, again, in the discipline of net zero, of this inherent overlap of value chain, this was the main problem or the main risk in the travel industry. We wanted to help flag, outline solutions for, and work toward, which is, so the idea is, okay, I need to offset my business travel because I am a buyer of business travel, which is my transport and my accommodation. But then I'm an OTA or a corporate travel buyer. And so my sold product is that room night and that flight. So I actually need to account for that in my value chain. Then I'm the hotel's operator. So the emissions, I need to be responsible for the hotel. But I'm the hotel's owner and I'm responsible. And then you might have a franchisor of that hotel at a global chain who then also has to put that in. Then you've got the destination, you've got the government, you've got all the entities. And so in this methodology that we have coming out, we outlined and we said, look, there are at least 15 different entities who at some level need to claim responsibility for a hotel night. Think about even then we get into event organizers and you know, all of that. And so so we've got actually examples of COP, you know, so someone's going on behalf of this organization, this company is organizing the event, organizing the room block, they're staying here, they booked on this. So anyway, all of that needs transparency, because otherwise there's going to be rampant, just rampant offsetting, rampant initiatives, and it's going to lose the consumer, the customer in the message, which is, what if I'm getting 5 different messages about I'm staying, and I'm getting 5 different claims of offsets, I'm getting all this, and then there's this abundance of extra money being paid. So what we're trying to do here is say, we need a better way to do that. I'm not saying I know how to solve it, but call to action, make it transparent, and then we can actually make the more effective ways, which is, for example, first, everybody stop with the offsetting. 100% renewable electricity first, and then we talk about offsetting. Second, we need to have a mechanism for there's transparency. So if the hotel has 100% electricity, all the others in the value chain know that. Yeah. And then when it comes to offsetting, the offset would need to be consistent, and the offset should benefit tenants of sustainable tourism. It should benefit destinations. It should benefit other areas that have much more relevance to our industry, which makes offsets different because you have experience, right? So that's where we're trying to put this all into perspective in this methodology as the net zero discussion evolves. And then we're just the hotels right now, but then comes the OTAs, then comes the travel buyers, then comes everybody else, and they're gonna have the same discussion. So, you know, we're at the table.
When do you think we might see this new methodology?
Well, depends on when you're viewing this, but we're slated to be out by end of November. The methodologies, we get a steering committee of 5 entities, of which we're just one, advisory group of 22 hotel companies, stakeholder consultations all over right now to make sure this is really buttoned up and has the issues correctly outlined and approached and is related and aligned with all the various frameworks, because we want this to live for years. Right? Hopefully we can keep improving this over time, but it will still be relevant. So I want to make sure it's good. So, and then we've got to design it, make it look pretty, of course. So that is slated for end of November, possibly earlier for the version 1. And then hopefully that will start the ball. And hopefully next year we can have another discussion on where we're at since then and what tangibly has improved in the last year.
Presumably you'll be able to, with the partners you're working with, you'll actually be able to measure what's happening at the international level in terms of carbon reduction.
We will. So we have the Cornell Hotel Sustainability Benchmarking Index, hotel footprinting tool. Dozens of hotel companies give us the data. We have 20,000 hotels in the data set, so we can actually track the trends over time. And that's one of the things we're going to be improving next year is this renewable energy piece and the intensity of energy, and give it a much more granular approach. So definitely that's what we hope to do, is help track, and hopefully by 2030 we'll put ourselves out of business because we won't need to be tracking that anymore because it's already 100% renewable. But I know that's a little too optimistic.
That is just ridiculous. That's fantasy, man. Eric, there'll always be parts of the industry that need further work doing on it. Eric, can I just say, first of all, can I say thank you, but can I also just comment that you and I have talked many times. This is the most cheerful and optimistic that I've seen you, and you're quite right. We do need to shift to a can-do rather than you can't do that kind of attitude in sustainability. We've not done very well over the last 20 years. We need to do a hell of a lot better in the next 10. So thank you very much indeed.
Well, my pleasure, and glad to hear that from you, because I know this is, it's been a long journey, but yeah, it's time to be optimistic. And but then obviously now we have more tangible things to push, forward.
Very exciting times. Thanks, Eric.